Careful with that tray, sweetheart. We wouldn't want you to ruin $1 million gown. The voice cut through the golden-lit ballroom like a knife disguised as silk. Anna felt the words sting as she balanced a silver tray of champagne flutes. The woman who spoke, a guest shimmering in emerald silk, diamonds dripping from her neck, didn't even look at her. She spoke loudly enough for the surrounding tables to hear, as if Anna was entertainment, not a human being carrying 20 pounds of crystal in trembling hands. Another man, a heavy-set donor with a laugh too big for the room, chimed in, "Don't spill on me, girl. This suit costs more than your month's paycheck." His friends chuckled, and Anna lowered her eyes, focusing on the floor pattern rather than their sneering grins. Her black uniform vest felt tighter with each step. She hated how her throat warmed, hated the way humiliation spread across her chest like fire. She told herself to breathe, to count each step until she reached the long banquet table. The gala was in full swing. Golden chandeliers dripped light like melted honey. Strings hummed softly from the stage, and everywhere she turned, laughter floated above the clinking of glasses. Men in tuxedos and women in gowns glittered like they were born under chandeliers, while Anna remained invisible in her black shoes polished so many times the leather had cracked. Invisible, except when they wanted someone to mock. At the head of the ballroom stretched the grand table. A dozen guests sat there, but it was the man at the center who held the room in his gravity. Alexander Pierce, tall, broad-shouldered, with silver threaded through his hair like proof of time well lived. Billionaire, philanthropist, son of the late Jonathan Pierce, whose art collection was said to be one of the greatest private treasures in America. Tonight, Alexander was expected to make an announcement that would shift the cultural landscape of the city. The anticipation in the room was almost electric. Anna set the tray down carefully at a side station, her shoulders aching. She had been on her feet since sunrise. Her manager, Mr. Carson, had barked orders since noon, reminding her, and only her, it seemed, not to embarrass the hotel. Stay quiet. Keep your head down. Don't overstep. These are not your kind of people. His words clung to her like a stain she couldn't scrub off. But as she passed the head table, Anna couldn't help glancing at Alexander Pierce. He looked composed, nodding politely at the museum directors seated near him, their smiles too polished, their eyes too hungry. One of them, a thin man with spectacles, tapped a leather folio on the table, the contract. "Don't hover," Carson hissed suddenly at Anna's back. He had materialized from nowhere, his breath sharp with coffee and impatience. "Serve and move. Don't look at Mr. Pierce like you matter." "You don't." Anna swallowed and nodded. She moved to the far side of the room to gather empty glasses, though her chest ached from the sting of his words. She had grown up working class. She was no stranger to being overlooked. But something about tonight felt sharper, more unbearable, as if every laugh and jab chipped away at her very existence. She tried to focus on the rhythm of work. Collect, stack, return. A dance she had mastered. But the chatter near the head table kept tugging her ears. Tonight, Alexander's voice rose above the hum, steady and commanding. "I intend to honor my father's memory by entrusting his art collection to the city's museum." The ballroom erupted in applause, forks tapping against crystal. The museum directors beamed, their smiles stretching like theater masks. Anna set down a tray and clapped politely, but a knot tightened in her stomach. Something about the way the thin man slid the contract forward, the way his fingers curled possessively around the pen, unsettled her. She had seen contracts before, not museum ones, but legal papers her grandfather had left behind. He had been a retired attorney, and as a child, Anna had sat at his desk, listening as he explained how words could build traps. "Always read the fine print, Anna," he used to say, tapping the papers with his gnarled hand. "That's where the truth hides." And now, standing with a water pitcher at her side, she caught a glimpse. Just a glimpse. The contract wasn't fully closed. The museum director had carelessly left a page angled toward the edge of the table. Anna's eyes caught the word, transfer of ownership. Her breath stalled. Not donation. Not entrusting. Transfer. The language was different, colder. She remembered enough from her grandfather's lessons to know it wasn't the same thing. The collection wouldn't belong to the people. It would be sold off, piece by piece, swallowed by hands already rubbing with greed. She froze, pitcher trembling slightly in her grasp. Should she? No, it wasn't her place. She was a waitress. Who would listen? Who wouldn't laugh her straight out of the ballroom? Still, her eyes flicked back to the open page. The words burned against her mind, echoing her grandfather's warnings. She bit her lip so hard she tasted blood. Mr. Carson passed behind her, muttering, "Stand straight, Anna, for God's sake. You look like you've seen a ghost." Maybe she had. The applause died down, and Alexander reached for the pen. His hand hovered over the contract, the room waiting, breaths collectively drawn for the ceremonial flourish. Anna felt her pulse hammer. She knew she should look away, but the words in her head screamed louder than fear. "Please, don't sign that." The words slipped from her lips before she could stop them. Soft, trembling, but audible enough in the fragile silence between applause and signature. Alexander's hand paused midair. The director stiffened. The nearest guests turned, eyes narrowing in disbelief. The silence shattered with a ripple of laughter. Did the waitress just advise a billionaire? One guest scoffed, his voice dripping with amusement. Another leaned closer to his wife, whispering far too loudly, "Next she'll be telling us how to run Wall Street." Chuckles rolled through the tables, a cruel wave that left Anna standing exposed, red burning her cheeks. She wanted to shrink, to vanish. Mr. Carson was at her side in an instant, his face dark red. "Anna." His voice cracked like a whip. "Apologize right now. You've embarrassed this establishment. You're finished here." He reached to grab her arm, but she pulled back, her voice shaking yet firmer this time. "No, you don't understand. It's not a donation. It's—" Carson hissed. "Not another word." He shoved her lightly toward the back, his fury barely masked by his forced smile to the guests. "Forgive her. She's nothing but a server. She doesn't know what she's talking about." The museum director's laugh was smooth but tight. "Indeed. Let's not let the staff derail such a moment." But Alexander Pierce hadn't moved. His pen still hovered, his eyes fixed on Anna. The room, for all its derision, seemed to bend toward that point of tension, a waitress trembling under chandeliers, a billionaire caught between tradition and instinct. "Anna," Carson snapped, low and threatening. "Walk away. Right now." Her hands trembled around the pitcher, but she didn't move. She looked directly at Alexander, her voice breaking yet urgent. "Sir, please. Just look at the wording. Please." Carson's grip on her arm tightened. "That's enough. You're done here. Out." Alexander raised a hand suddenly, silencing Carson. "Wait," he said. The single word shifted the air. Gasps echoed softly across the room. Carson froze, his face draining of color. The museum directors exchanged uneasy glances. Alexander's gaze remained steady on Anna. "You said it's not a donation. What did you mean?" Anna swallowed, her throat dry. I only saw part of it. But it said transfer of ownership. That's different. My grandfather taught me. It means they won't just display it. They'll own it. They can sell it. Piece by piece." The room had grown so quiet that even the string quartet faltered, their bows stuttering before falling silent. Carson whispered harshly, "Sir, she doesn't know." But Alexander didn't look at him. His eyes stayed on Anna, searching, weighing. Around the table, whispers stirred, sharp as knives. One guest muttered, "This is absurd," while another leaned in, curiosity piqued. The museum director with the spectacles cleared his throat, trying to recover his composure. "Mr. Pierce, with all due respect, surely you wouldn't take legal advice from the waitstaff." His laugh was hollow, forced. Anna's voice wavered, but she didn't look away. "Please just read it again." And there, under the glittering chandeliers, in the pause before the world decided whether she would be ridiculed into silence or heard against all odds, Alexander Pierce set the pen down. The room leaned forward. The museum director with the spectacles forced a laugh, desperate to regain control. "Mr. Pierce, this is beneath you. Are we truly entertaining the outburst of someone who serves canapés?" Laughter trickled from a few tables, nervous at first, then sharper. "Imagine legal lessons from a girl carrying pitchers." One man in a velvet jacket shook his head with a smirk. "Next she'll tell us the stock market's rigged." The cruel chorus spread. Anna felt her stomach tighten, her fingers slick against the glass pitcher. She wished she could sink into the marble floor, vanish behind the towering centerpieces. But she also felt something else, a small, stubborn ember of her grandfather's voice in her head. "Don't look away from the truth, even if no one believes you." Mr. Carson seized the moment, his face tight with rage, his tone dripping venom masked as professionalism. Mr. Pierce, I assure you, this young woman is speaking far out of turn. She's new, inexperienced, and clearly doesn't understand the first thing about contracts. Anna, apologize to the gentleman right now. Anna blinked at him, her lips parted. But, no buts. Carson's hand clamped around her elbow, squeezing hard enough to make her wince. He hissed through his teeth, his voice low but audible to those nearby. You've embarrassed this hotel for the last time. Do you hear me? You're finished. The museum director leaned back in his chair, smug. Quite right. She's had her little moment. Now, let's put this to rest. But Alexander Pierce didn't move. He had set the pen down, and his gaze remained on Anna, sharp and thoughtful, as though he were the only one in the room not swept up in mockery. Anna swallowed hard. She forced herself to speak, even as her voice cracked. I know I'm just a waitress, but words matter. My grandfather taught me that. Transfer of ownership doesn't mean the same thing as donation. Please, just make sure before you sign away something that can't be undone. Carson tugged her arm harder, trying to drag her backward. Enough, Anna. You've destroyed your career here tonight. Out. Wait. The single word was calm, but it cut through Carson's fury like steel. Alexander's voice carried easily, commanding silence without raising its volume. Carson froze, his grip still on Anna's arm. Alexander's eyes flicked to him. Let her go. Carson's face drained of color. Sir, she's a server. She doesn't. I said. Alexander repeated, his tone firmer. Let her go. Reluctantly, Carson's fingers slipped from Anna's arm. He stepped back, pale with a mix of fury and fear. The other guests shifted uneasily in their seats, the hierarchy they all depended on suddenly wobbling under the weight of that simple command. The museum directors exchanged frantic glances. One of them leaned toward Alexander, voice hushed but urgent. With all due respect, this is highly irregular. If we delay now, it will be seen as a lack of confidence. Surely you wouldn't place the word of staff above your trusted advisors. Alexander didn't respond right away. Instead, he gestured to the contract. Bring it here. A murmur swept the room. Carson looked as if he'd been struck, while the museum directors stiffened. One of their lawyers, the same man who had been chuckling a moment earlier, rose to his feet, trying to mask his unease with a smile. Mr. Pierce, the paperwork is clear. We've gone over it extensively. There's no need. Alexander cut him off with a glance. Bring it. Now. The folio was reluctantly slid toward him. Alexander opened it with slow precision, his fingers steady, his eyes scanning the lines with the quiet focus of a man who knew exactly what he was looking for. The silence in the ballroom was unbearable. The guests shifted, some whispering behind their hands, others waiting with wide eyes. Carson hovered a step behind Anna, his chest heaving, sweat shining at his temples. And then Alexander's jaw tightened. He tapped a line on the page with his index finger. His voice was low, but in the silence it carried. Transfer of ownership. The words dropped into the room like thunder. The museum directors flinched. One of them began to stammer. That's simply legal language. It's just a formality. No, Alexander said firmly, looking up at them. It isn't. A donation means the collection belongs to the public trust. A transfer means it becomes yours. To do with as you please. To sell. The ballroom erupted in shocked murmurs. Guests turned to one another, voices rising with disbelief. Some gasped openly. Others leaned in with scandalized whispers. The lawyer who had mocked Anna earlier stood frozen, his face drained of color, his smile gone. Anna's heart hammered. She couldn't believe it. She had been heard. Carson looked stricken, as though the floor had opened beneath him. He stuttered, trying to salvage himself. Sir, I told her not to interrupt. She's overstepped. Alexander raised a hand, silencing him. His eyes shifted back to Anna. For a moment, in the glitter of the chandeliers, it felt as though the entire room had shrunk down to just the two of them. You noticed this? He asked her quietly. Anna swallowed hard. Only a glimpse. But yes, my grandfather always warned me about words like that. He said they're traps people don't see until it's too late. Alexander studied her face for a long moment. Then he nodded, a subtle but decisive gesture. You were right to speak. Gasps rippled through the room. Guests who had mocked her minutes ago now sat stunned, their laughter caught in their throats. The museum directors fumbled for excuses, their voices overlapping, desperate. "Mr. Pierce, this is a misunderstanding. Surely you can't." "Enough." Alexander's voice cut through the chaos. He closed the folio with a sharp snap and pushed it away from him. His tone was calm, but the finality in it was unmistakable. "We're done here." The directors froze, their faces pale. Security, sensing the shift in power, moved discreetly closer. One guest whispered, "They tried to trick him," while another muttered, "She saved him." Anna stood rooted to the spot, her hands trembling, her face flushed. The room that had mocked her seconds ago now stared at her with something new. Disbelief, shock, even a glimmer of respect. Carson tried once more, his voice faltering. "Mr. Pierce, I can assure you I had no idea." Alexander turned his gaze on him, sharp as glass. "You tried to silence her. Remember that." Carson's mouth opened, then shut again. Sweat beaded on his forehead. Anna, still breathless, wanted to say something, anything, but the words stuck in her throat. She wasn't used to being heard. She wasn't used to being believed. The string quartet had gone completely still, bows frozen in midair. The chandeliers seemed to gleam brighter, casting golden light across a room now heavy with silence and shifting power. And in the middle of it all, Anna stood shaking, wondering if she had just ruined her life or saved something far greater. Alexander's eyes never left her. "Tell me," he said slowly, the pen still lying untouched beside the contract. "What else do you see?" Anna's throat tightened. Dozens of eyes burned into her, waiting for her to crumble. She felt the weight of every laugh, every sneer that had been thrown her way tonight, pressing on her shoulders. But Alexander's gaze wasn't mocking, nor dismissive. It was expectant, curious, respectful. She drew in a shaky breath. "I don't know everything, sir. I'm not a lawyer. But I know enough to recognize when words aren't honest. That contract isn't protecting your father's legacy. It's taking it away. They would have owned everything. And in a few years, nothing would be left. Your father's work would just vanish." Her voice cracked at the end, but the silence afterward was sharper than any ridicule. The museum directors shifted uncomfortably, panic seeping into their polished faces. The lawyer who had laughed earlier pulled at his collar, sweat gathering at his temples. Alexander leaned back slowly, his hand resting on the folio as if weighing the gravity of her words. He studied the faces of the men across the table, saw the fear they could no longer hide, and then looked back at Anna. "You've saved me from making the worst mistake of my life," he said quietly. The entire room gasped. The museum directors erupted in protest, voices tripping over each other in desperation. "Mr. Pierce, this is absurd. We've prepared this for months. You can't." Security. Alexander didn't even raise his voice, but two suited guards were already in motion. The directors sputtered, their protests growing shrill as they were escorted out under the eyes of 200 stunned guests. Murmurs chased them out of the ballroom like a tide of judgment. Anna stood frozen, her hands trembling at her sides, unsure if she should stay or flee. Mr. Carson tried to salvage himself, stepping forward with a forced laugh. "Mr. Pierce, forgive the disturbance. I'll see that she is dealt with immediately. She won't be working here another day." But Alexander turned his eyes on him, cold and unyielding. "You silenced the one voice that told the truth. Pack your things, Mr. Carson. Your services are no longer required." Carson's mouth opened, but no sound came out. His face blanched, his shoulders sagged, and without another word, he turned and slipped out of the ballroom, swallowed by the same silence that had mocked Anna minutes earlier. For a moment, Anna thought she might collapse. Her knees felt weak, her chest too tight to breathe. She stared at the floor, ashamed of her tears threatening to spill, wishing she could hold them back in front of so many watching eyes. Then Alexander stood. The billionaire who had commanded the room all evening now rose to his full height, his gaze sweeping over the guests. "Tonight was meant to honor my father's legacy. Instead, it nearly destroyed it. And the only reason it didn't is because someone in this room had the courage to speak when the rest of you stayed silent." He turned toward Anna. She froze, every muscle locking. "Anna," he said, his voice softened now. "You didn't just save my father's collection. You reminded me that truth doesn't always come from the polished or the powerful. It can come from anyone brave enough to speak it." The crowd was utterly silent. The same guests who had laughed at her, who had mocked her uniform and smirked at her trembling hands, now stared as though seeing her for the first time. Anna's voice barely rose above a whisper. I only wanted to do the right thing. Alexander's expression softened further, and for a moment, the weight of wealth and legacy lifted, revealing something purely human in his eyes. That's exactly why you belong by my side. A collective murmur rippled across the ballroom. Gasps, whispers, disbelief. Anna's heart thudded wildly as Alexander turned to his aide. Draw up a new arrangement tomorrow. And as of tonight, Miss Anna is no longer a waitress. She'll be working with me. Anna's mouth parted in shock. With you? But Aunt, you've proven yourself more loyal to my father's memory than anyone else at this table. Alexander interrupted gently. I trust you. The word struck her harder than any insult ever had. Not with pain, but with something unfamiliar. Something she wasn't sure she deserved. Belief. For the first time that night, Anna lifted her head. She saw the room differently now, not chandeliers and gowns designed to remind her of her place, but faces stripped bare of arrogance, eyes watching her with a quiet respect that hadn't been there before. The music slowly returned, soft and tentative, filling the silence left behind. But the room's center had shifted, no longer on the directors, or even entirely on Alexander, but on the young woman who had refused to stay invisible. As the night carried on, Alexander stayed near her side, introducing her not as staff, but as the woman who had saved his father's legacy. People nodded, extended hands, stammered compliments they hadn't thought they'd ever give to a waitress. But Anna barely heard them. She only felt the quiet relief of her grandfather's voice echoing inside her. Always read the fine print. Always speak when no one else will. And now, as she walked out of the ballroom under the golden chandeliers, it was not as the invisible waitress they had mocked, but as someone finally seen. And that was Anna's story, a simple woman mocked, until the truth turned the room upside down. Thank you for watching. From where are you listening to this story? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories like this. And hit the bell icon so you never miss the next one.